Nina Dobrev has officially said that she left The Vampire Diaries because of pay disparity. There's a new book out called I Was Feeling Epic, which is an oral history of The Vampire Diaries. And in that book, Nina Dobrev talks about the fact that she left The Vampire Diaries because she was never paid the same amount as her male co-stars. Ian Somerhalder and Paul Wesley, who would be considered Nina Dobrev's co-leads, were paid more than she was every single season of the show. Additionally, in this interview, she reveals that not only was that the case, but for the first 2 seasons, she, Kat Graham, and Candace King, who played the kind of 3 best friends of the show, were the lowest paid series regulars of that show. Not only that, but Nina in particular was playing 2 roles. If you've watched The Vampire Diaries, you know that Nina was not only playing Elena Gilbert, but she was also playing her own sort of evil twin, Catherine. And in the story, Catherine was someone who looked identical to her, but had a completely different narrative, was a vampire, and had a completely different way of playing this character. This meant that consistently she was doing twice the amount of work for less pay than her male co-stars. And Nina goes on to say that when she brought this up as part of her pay negotiations looking for parity, the response by the studio was to tell the writers to make sure to write less Catherine scenes, because they had to pay her for both roles. Nina maintains that while she did get a pay raise, she was never paid the same amount as Paul Wesley and Ian Somerhalder, and when she made the decision to leave the show, it was because of pay disparity. She felt that it wasn't about the money, but about the principle of it, and that she needed to put her foot down and stand for what she believed in. And ultimately, that ended up being a problem for her coming back to the show for the end. She says that she was offered a rate that was 5 times less what she was getting paid on the show originally. Now, what's interesting about this is that we hear about pay disparity in this way in Hollywood all the time. It's an unfortunate truth and something that we're consistently seeing people fight to have changed. But the idea that the story of the show was changed, especially a character who was such a fan favorite, is also really disheartening, especially for a storyline that was so dynamic and interesting and very much a fan favorite of the show. Something that made the show so special in a way that it was able to go for as long as it did is quite disheartening and frustrating. I think it's important for Nina to be able to say that this was the case, and to be able to say that she stood up for herself and that's why she left the show, even if it's all these years later. And I think, of course, this is highlighting an issue that we know is a problem. We know that women are paid less, especially when it comes to situations like this, and this is not the first time that a female lead has been paid less than her male co-stars. And I think it's an important one for people to continue utilizing while we fight for pay parity. But I do wonder what the show would have looked like in the end if the studio had just met the pay parity demands and allowed Nina to continue playing both roles. What would Catherine's story have looked like if they weren't asked to write her out? What would Elena's story look like if she hadn't needed to leave the show? I think as someone who's worked in television, it's important to remember that sometimes these are the things happening behind the scenes, and business does affect story a lot. And so unfortunately, when it comes to things like TV, we don't always get the story that we would have if everything on the business side was working properly. Business decisions do affect story, and sometimes those decisions are a bit more insidious than others. If you've read I Was Feeling Epic or you've read Nina's interview, how did you feel about it? Do you feel like the story was irreparably changed because of this? And what do you think would have been different if Nina had continued to play Catherine and had been paid equally and not left the show?